Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. They offer free checking with industry-leading mobile banking. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more.
What's up, Hokie Nation, and welcome into episode 388 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Virginia Tech falls in another one-possession game this weekend as the Hokies fall to Syracuse 38-31 in overtime. We got the whole football crew on set to break it down, so let's get it rolling. Episode 388 of the Tech Sideline podcast starts right now. We're recording on Monday, November 4th, 2024 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, and refer the show to a friend. And head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content. And for Virginia Tech students, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The Tech Sideline podcast is also brought to you by Triumph NIL. The Triumph Spotlight has returned to the Tech Sideline YouTube channel. Check out our video feed for the latest interviews featuring Virginia Tech student athletes and visit triumphnil.com to learn more and support Hokies NIL. I'm your host, Carter Hill, filling in for Giovanni Heater. To my right is lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. Across the way is our senior staff writer, Andy Bitter. In the fourth chair is our managing editor, David Cunningham. And Nick Brown is producing behind the scenes. Well, guys, the Hokies fall in another one-score game to Syracuse. First off, Andy, David, how was your trip to the Salt City?
It was a good trip. Is Gio in like protective services right now?
He had to separate himself. No, he's doing women's basketball tonight on the ACC Network Extra. So I know he would have loved to have been here, but I'm sure he would have. Yes. Oh, I know. But I know he's happy to have you guys.
He probably updated that Carrier Dome tattoo to put the big
the
metal structure on the top of it, something like that. No, it was a good trip to Syracuse. Enjoyed it. Dinosaur Barbecue lived up to the hype. Very good time there.
Don't forget the Mexican restaurant.
The Mexican restaurant was pretty good too. We didn't really go out and do a whole lot. When you get to the end of like a 10-hour drive, which is what it was going up there, it's like I don't really want to do much. So kind of an exhausting trip, but enjoyed it anyway.
It was good. That is such an interesting place to play a football game.
Yes.
Like I've never been there before. I'd never been there for basketball either. But of course, at the end, we saw them reconverting it because their basketball game's in the Dome today. We saw it converting it into a basketball arena again. A very, very interesting place. It feels pretty loud in there, like it would for a basketball game almost. And it wasn't completely full by any means, but it was pretty loud in there, and pretty good seats for the media. I mean, you're kind of right down there. Very, very, very good vantage point. So pretty good experience. Better than Virginia Tech's, I think.
It is a very interesting place to watch a football game. And the noise is different in there. Like you can hear like the clap of the hands like echo through the building. You can hear like the toe meeting leather echoing through the building. Just very, very strange, very strange. Did not get to Coleman's, Chris. I hate to admit it. I'm sorry.
When does Tech play at Syracuse again?
2029.
It's going to be a while.
It's going to be a while.
I'm sorry. We didn't get there. Where did you watch the game at in Blacksburg?
I watched the first half at Sharkies and I watched the second half at Champs.
And you didn't go back to Sharkies at some point after you saw the way the game was going?
I should have.
This one's on you, Chris.
The only reason
Don't blame this on the curse. This one's on you.
The only reason I left is because I needed to get something from the farmer's market. And I was literally like, well, I'm going to do it at halftime because the game stopped. So I go to the farmer's market and then I'm like, well, I won't quite get back to Sharkies in time for the second half. So I just tucked into Champs and watched the second half there.
Classic mistake.
But it's, I know. You should know better. It's all my fault.
Nick saw Taylor Swift this weekend in Indianapolis.
The best weekend of all.
I know. We also got to try Dinosaur Barbecue. Very good, I thought.
I would not think upstate New York would be known for their barbecue.
No.
That place is pretty good. It was worth the wait.
Yeah, Gio, I've heard Gio rave about it, and I will give credit to him. That was very, very good, on point. Favorite part was Ivan going, "What is this cornbread?" Like Ivan had never seen cornbread before.
We introduced him to margaritas at Stanford and cornbread at Syracuse.
And we played a lot of Rasputin.
He's a brand new man. Rasputin. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, let's get to the game.
Yes.
Virginia Tech falls in overtime, 38-31. And my biggest takeaway is the Hokies didn't have Kyron Drones. They did not have Bayshall Tootin. They were down to Colin Schlee, Jeremiah Coney, and Malachi Thomas. Yet that is still not the reason they lost the game. Just a late collapse defensively, and the Hokies end up falling again.
If you had told me before the game that the Hokies would score 31 points, 455 yards of total offense, be balanced between the run and the pass, have a +1 turnover margin in 4 quarters of football, and have over 34 minutes time of possession, I would have felt pretty good about winning that football game. Like, that's the perfect recipe, I think, for offensive success. Unfortunately, that was like a defensive collapse of epic proportions. And, we'll talk about some game day, in-game decisions later. But I think, for me, the main reason you lost that football game is because the defensive collapse. I mean, Syracuse scored a touchdown in, 4 of their last 5 offensive possessions?
5 of 6, I believe.
I mean, just in regulation, of course. But, so if you count overtime, 5 out of 6. So you can't win any football game when the other team's scoring touchdowns at that high a rate. And I just thought the defense was really bad, whether it was a missed tackle on a blitz, whether it was a guy blitzing when he wasn't supposed to blitz, whether it was a safety come in and tackling Virginia Tech's cornerback instead of the wide receiver. It was just a comedy of errors, except I wasn't laughing. But like my main issue was just how they bludgeoned Virginia Tech in the running game. LaQuinn Allen set his season high in yards, touchdowns, carries, second highest mark of the season in yards per carry. And that's a week after Virginia Tech controlled what had been a pretty good Georgia Tech running game. And then Allen comes out and has his first 100-yard rushing game of the season. So just a very disappointing collapse by the Virginia Tech defense.
Yeah, it's the second time Brent Pry and his staff have blown an 18-point lead. You go back to the NC State game in 2022 where they set back offensive football 50 years in the first half, and then they're up 21-3 in the third quarter. And, freshman quarterback for NC State comes back and wins this. This was a little bit better offense than that and a little bit better quarterback they were going up against. But, man, it's got to be frustrating for Hokies fans. They have that huge lead with your backup quarterback, backup running backs, missing your 2 star players on offense, and then to give it away like that. And the way they gave it away, it's, quick plays, big plays. It's like you got that lead, just make them go the length of the field. Yeah. Make them eat up a lot of clock. No, 55-yard touchdown when you gamble on a pick on a 0 blitz. Blitz at the wrong time in the other field. They get a screen pass that goes for 40-some yards. They just kept giving up these big plays that allowed Syracuse to get back in the game really quickly. I mean, it was like 9 minutes, and that lead was gone. So they didn't do a good job of holding that lead, and then we'll talk about it here, but more game management issues and a half and a game that you can, kind of zero in on the coaching staff and go, man, they just don't quite get it in these situations. It's not working well. It's sort of shades of the 1998 game. When look back, Virginia Tech had a 21-3 lead in that game. Granted, they were going up against a quarterback named Donovan McNabb, so pretty good guy on the other sideline, but sort of that same feeling and same disappointing result at the end.
Sticking on the injury front, after hearing from Brent Pry that Bayshall Tootin was probable on Tuesday, were you surprised that he couldn't go? I mean, he barely even went through full warm-ups before the game, Andy.
Yeah, I was. I think we should void all picks for this game because we didn't have that information. They really go to great lengths to try to hide what these injuries are. David had heard that Kyron's pretty beat up going into the Georgia Tech game, but I don't think any of us thought during this week that he wouldn't play this week at all. They trotted him out there on Wednesday, and he went through the drills when the media was out there, and clearly they just kind of do that for our benefit, just to kind of throw people off the scent, because it sounds like he didn't do much work all week, and it was the Colin Schlee show at quarterback. So, you can't really trust what any coach says on Monday or Tuesday early in the week. Probably can't trust what they show us on Wednesday in terms of injuries, because they're going to try to subtly, manipulate what people are thinking about that. And honestly, this is why they need the injury reports on things.
Yes, I agree.
There's a gambling element out there.
Yes.
And if these coaches are playing games with these kinds of injury reports and trying to hide stuff, it's like people on these teams and people in the know on these teams are all of a sudden targets for people with lots of money that are trying to make money on this kind of stuff. And I think the NCAA, if it really wants to avoid having that element seep into the game, that's where they have to address it. There's a reason why the NFL has injury reports. It's because they put stuff out there like that. They want to keep the gambling stuff somewhat regulated so you don't have people, oh, hey, here's $100 if you tell me if this guy's going to play a quarterback or something like that. I feel like that's what the NCAA should be more concerned with when it comes to gambling type stuff than, a linebacker made some NBA bets some summer. So that's just my tangent rant on injury reports.
So I'll come clean. Early in the week, I thought Tootin was going to play. After Virginia Tech released that picture of him practicing, I didn't think he was going to play.
When it clearly wasn't him from that day.
Correct.
Yes,
exactly.
it was from the summer.
Right, exactly. So if anybody doesn't know, Virginia Tech, I think it was on Wednesday, posted a picture of practice, what was supposedly from practice that day, and there's Tootin taking a handoff, right? And Andy had been at practice earlier that day, and Tootin had been wearing something completely different.
He had pants.
He had
him
pants
and Drones
on,
both had pants on in the pictures.
As opposed to football
like
pants.
longer sweatpants, and they didn't have that on in those
exactly.
pictures.
So Tech just shows a picture from earlier in the year and put it out there to make it look like he was going to play. And I'm sitting there thinking, if you're going to that great a length to try to deceive someone, then he's probably not going to play. Yeah. So I'm not surprised that was the result. Drones obviously threw me for a loop, and in hindsight, it explains the offensive struggles against Georgia Tech.
He didn't run the ball very much in that game. Mm-hmm. If you look at the numbers, I think it was like 8 carries, which
and 3 of those were
some of his lowest carry totals for the year, I would imagine. So I don't know how long this is going to linger. I don't know if he'll be available for Clemson. I'm certainly not going to trust anything that the coaches say about it on Tuesday or what they show us on Wednesday. Like that's useless now. So it's one thing to do all this stuff, but it's like, okay, are you going to believe anything these coaches say about injuries now? And if you start playing those kind of games, it just seems like they're focused on the wrong things when it comes to that kind of stuff. Focus elsewhere, I don't know, game management,
yes,
clock management, stuff like that. Put the attention to detail into that you do on this subterfuge when it comes to injuries.
So Drones against Georgia Tech had 8 carries for 6 yards. So there you go. He also, what was so bizarre about that situation is, again, we had heard the murmurs a little bit that maybe he was banged up and maybe there's a chance he wasn't going to play, but he goes through all of warm-ups, the entirety of first team reps. And what was very telling to me in the press box was the CW had in their preview mode before the game a Colin Schlee package ready to go, which was very telling that if they had that package, that they knew that Drones was not going to play. And to your
the
point,
networks all meet with the coaches
right, yes,
ahead of
production
time,
meetings.
but they keep it quiet. That's the whole point of those meetings. So they knew.
Yes.
They knew ahead of time, and I think they just put Drones and Tootin through a show.
Yes.
I don't think they were ever going to play before the game. Now, it was more believable than Grant Wells, because Grant Wells was out there with at that Rutgers game, he was out there with a walker. He could barely move in that game. It's come on now, guys. That's not even close to believable. At least Tootin and Drones could actually run and go through some stuff.
Yeah. It did come out of nowhere, though. Kind of flashing quickly to that second half. And Andy hit on it a little bit. But you're up 21-3. Mm-hmm. And what was so jarring to me is how quickly the Hokies gave up the lead.
Yeah.
8 minutes and 22 seconds of game time for Virginia Tech to be leading by 18 to losing by 3.
It was halfway through the second quarter when they took that 21-3 lead. So you're sitting there.
Third quarter.
Excuse me. Yes. Things are trending up. And you've won 3 football games in a row. Now you're in your house of horrors, leading by 18 points halfway through the third quarter. You're about to win 4 in a row. Bring on Clemson, right? And then bam. And I don't even think you can call this a team loss, because it's not like the offense went out there and started going 3 and out for the rest of the game. They still scored 10 points after that. They scored more points in the second half than they did in the first half, and still lost the game. So that, like I said, man, it was just that was one of the worst 22-minute stretch of defense that I've ever seen out of Virginia Tech. And which is odd, because they played so well for the first half. I mean, they pretty much dominated Syracuse in the first half. Things just turned on a dime.
If you get a big lead like that, you can adjust your gameplay and stress to your defense. All right, no big plays. They might go, 70 yards and 14 plays like they did at the tail end to score a touchdown, but they're going to have to put together a drive like that. Long drive, convert some third downs, eat up a lot of clock on the way there. I mean, I think you said there's like 7 minutes left in the third quarter when they took that 21-3 lead. I mean, you should try to limit possessions that they could even have the rest of the game. If you're up 3 scores at that point, what do they do? 55-yard touchdown on a zero blitz, and Mansour, if he's going for the pick, but he can't get the tackle, the guy slips it and goes for the touchdown. Coney fumbles on the drive, short field, they score on that. I forget the exact order of how these things came. Somebody blitzed. I think it was, you said it was Caleb Spencer that blitzed on a play when he wasn't supposed to. Screen out wide that goes for 42 inside the 5-yard line. They score a touchdown. That, I mean, if you just make them work for those touchdowns instead of bam, it's over in 10 seconds or whatever it is, then maybe the clock is closer to the end of the game and you're not worrying about, now we have to come back from this thing to try to win this. It seems like they did a terrible job of managing it and like stressing, like, here's what we absolutely cannot do in these situations is we cannot give up big plays, we cannot turn the ball over, and those are the two things they did, and that's how you erase a 18-point deficit in 9 minutes of game time or whatever it was.
The big plays were very telling. And post-game, Brent Pry and the student athletes that spoke with the media talked, to your point, Chris, about the mental errors and that side of things. Blitzing on the screenplay that went for 40-plus yards or whatever it may be. How much is that on the coaching side of things in the second half in terms of what transpired and how quickly Virginia Tech gave up the lead and the manner in which they did, to Andy's point?
I don't have anything against Virginia Tech's scheme. I think the scheme is fine. And I think you have to look at it bigger picture than this game. All 4 losses, Virginia Tech losses this year, have something in common. It's the defense gave up a lot of points late. When they stormed back, took the lead over Vanderbilt, and then what does Vanderbilt do? Bam! Go right back down the field and score with ease, and then score in overtime with ease. Rutgers game, Virginia Tech comes back and ties it, and then bam, Rutgers goes right down the field and scores. Miami game, Miami's a better offense, of course, but Virginia Tech had a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter, right, in that game, and then bam, they go down the field and score 2 straight touchdowns. And in this game, you've got an 18-point game and 18-point lead, and things are going great, and bam, a touchdown on 4 of your next 5 possessions, and the defense doesn't look like anything more than a speed bump, if that. So there's a trend in these games where Virginia Tech plays poor defense late in close games. So I don't think you can just look at this Syracuse game and say what went wrong in this game. It's why is it happening over and over again?
Yeah.
Well, there was a good comment on my 5 Thoughts message boarder, DL Lawson or D2 Lawson. I don't know which one it is. He said the Hokies would be 8-0-1 if the games this year ended at the 2-minute warning.
Yeah.
That's a similar number to like the 1992 team when they lost so many close games.
That 1992 team didn't feel like Tech was arriving that season there. Right. This felt like, everything was building up with the returning production, the amount of seniors they have, the quarterback back, the guys they retained. They could have gone to the NFL draft. It felt like this was building to this season to be successful. And I actually think next year might be a question with the amount of talent that they lose. They have a lot of work to do in the transfer portal to keep things going here. But I think that's the difference between 92 and this year. Similar hard luck losses like that late in the game, but there's maybe a little bit better outlook in 92 going to 93 than here, where you go a lot of major question marks on what you're going to fill.
See, and that's the big thing to me. It's not just the 1 possession games now. It's giving up late leads.
Right.
Like, that is the biggest thing to me. I mean, we've seen it Miami, Vanderbilt, and now Syracuse, a game in which you completely had in hand midway through.
Well, again, this is Pry's specialty.
Yes.
He's a defensive coach, and you hired him in part because they were going to play that kind of defense and not give up those kind of leads late. I mean, if there was a trust that you would have in this coaching staff, it would be, I'd rather be up 3 than down 3 late.
Yes.
Right? Like, you're going to lean on your defensive-minded head coach, and he's going to come with the right answers, and the scheme that he had at Penn State and Vanderbilt before that when they were pretty good defenses, and they're going to come up with a way to find the stops. And right now you don't feel comfortable with the defense on the field late in the game. I mean, sorry to say, but that's the way this season has played out this year. So that's the part that I think has got to be pretty frustrating for fans when they see what this hire was when they made it a couple years ago and what they expected this team to be.
That's absolutely right. I think not statistically, but if you look at the advanced metrics like F plus and FEI and all that. Virginia Tech has a better defense than they do last year, but at the same time, they don't pass the eye test at all for what I'm expected in the third year of the Brent Pry era as a defensive-minded coach. I think going into this game, they were 29th defensively in the F plus metrics, but like at the same time, how much of that is because they face so many backup quarterbacks? Or quarterbacks who eventually got benched, like the Marshall quarterback.
Although that ODU kid's pretty good.
He's
turns out he's been great.
Had a good year.
I mean, that was like his first start.
That was his first
it's
game.
It's like who was that guy at Ohio State? JT Barrett.
Yes,
It's like his first start is like, oh man, I don't know about this, and then he goes and sets the Big Ten passing touchdown record or whatever it was that year.
Yep. So I think that the advanced metrics are deceiving, and when I just look at this Tech defense, and I feel like they've got so many experienced players up front, they should be better against the run. And in some ways they have been, but if you just look at in their previous week against Georgia Tech, they were really good. But if you just look at the overall metrics, they're giving up more yards on the ground this year than they were last year, and the yards per carry allowed is extremely similar than last year. So I don't know how you bring all those guys back, and I know you lost some defensive tackles, but you also brought in Aeneas Peoples. I don't know how you have a couple of candidates for first team all ACC on your defensive line and then a bunch of juniors and seniors elsewhere, and you're what 84th against the run or something like that. You have to be better than that.
Yeah. David, I know you had something in the fourth chair.
Yeah, so there are two things I want to bring up while we're talking about the kind of the blown leads thing. This is the second time Brent Pry has done this. As Andy mentioned, a Brent Pry team has blown an 18-point lead, the NC State game. Prior to that game, the NC State game in 2022, the last time Virginia Tech had blown an 18-point lead and lost was the 2006 Chick-fil-A Bowl against Georgia, when it was up 21-3 in the second quarter and lost 31-24. I went back to 1987. It's happened 7 times. 5 of those were under Beamer. Ironically, 2 of them were in 98. Syracuse and Virginia. And there was also a game on here that was 17, Temple, also in 98. So it looks like that team just kind of had a thing with that. But 1990 Florida State, 92 Rutgers, 98 Syracuse, 98 Virginia, and then since the turn of the century, 2006 Georgia, 2022 Syracuse, and 2022 NC State, and 2024 Syracuse. The other thing is, and Andy talked about it a little bit, them just giving up huge plays. I believe Andy had it written in his column yesterday that the Hokies entered Saturday with having allowed 9 plays of 40-plus yards this year. Now it's 11 because they allowed 2. That's like 104th in the FBS. I went and looked, and I included this nugget in his story. Tech has allowed 11 plays of 40-plus yards this year. That has equated to, whether on that play or that drive, 48 points. In the last 6 games, it's happened 7 times. Twice against Miami, 2 touchdowns. Twice against Syracuse, 2 touchdowns. A field goal against Rutgers. Turnover on downs against Georgia Tech. And then the muffed field goal, fumbled field goal that Tech recovered against BC.
The crazy thing is, like, those 2 long Syracuse passing plays, the one where Delane missed the tackle.
The 55-yard.
That was that guy's first catch of the season.
Yeah, he hadn't really done anything.
And the screen also?
No, that was Pena.
Okay.
But
he had another one.
But Ross Simmons had the touchdown.
He had the go-ahead touchdown.
The go-ahead touchdown that where Mose Phillips and Mansour Delane hit each other.
Yeah.
So you can sit here and talk about, okay, if Miami does it, it's one thing. Miami's got proven players and everything like that, and Syracuse has got some good players, but at the same time, 2 of those big plays, a guy who hadn't caught a pass all year caught. You know, it's like we always complain about the basketball team when like some random guard that averages 5 points a game goes off for 23. that's what that guy did for Syracuse the other night in a football game.
The weird, and Delane had played so well up to that point. I mean, he had the pick in the end zone where he tracked it the whole way, and he really turned into the receiver on that play. Made a nice catch in the end zone. Then had the effort play where they had the short catch on the sideline right before halftime, and he strips it loose, and Virginia Tech gets a big turnover to keep him off the board there. So, I don't want to like pick on Delane too much because of that play, but it did happen. But he was playing well up to that point.
He was, and he's been a great tackler all season for Virginia Tech. He's been a fantastic physical tackler for Virginia Tech. So this isn't picking on Delane. This isn't picking on Caleb Spencer. This isn't picking on Mose Phillips. This is a trend for Virginia Tech.
Right.
And so like
a larger reflection.
I'm beyond like blaming individual players for that. It's just it's happening far too often to be able to point to like one guy or two guys and say, yeah, it's their fault.
Mansour Delane also left the game in the third quarter and didn't come back in.
He did. He was nicked up at the end. I'm not sure exactly when that happened. If it was the Mose Phillips play where he got hit by a teammate on the touchdown.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I didn't see exactly when he came out of the game, but they had Dante Lovett on the field at the end there.
That might have been it.
That would make sense because that was their next to last touchdown in regulation, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because Dante Lovett played the rest of the game.
I think that's right.
You talked about backup quarterbacks. Virginia Tech got a taste of its own medicine this weekend with Colin Schlee. He played a very nice game, though, for the Hokies. 16 for 24. Where'd it go? 16 for 24, 206 yards and a touchdown, 54 on the ground, and another score. How well did he run Virginia Tech's offense on Saturday?
Extremely well. Honestly, he put up drones-like numbers. That's a very drones-like box score line. So I don't think you can sit here and say that not having drones cost Virginia Tech the football game or anything like that, because you're talking about Colin Schlee's a former starter. And when he first signed with the Hokies, I'm like, for the Hokies are going to have a better backup than some teams are going to have in their starting lineup. This guy's a very experienced player. Not only that, like athletically, he's very well built to run the Virginia Tech offense, so how it looked last year. Now, you had to tweak a couple things, like he's more of an outside runner. But it's actually a good mix because Malachi Thomas is more of an inside runner. So you could kind of invert the offense, whereas Drones is normally your inside guy and Tootin's your outside guy. Instead, now your quarterback's your outside guy and Malachi Thomas is your running back is your inside guy. So they kind of inverted their run game a little bit, which is a fairly easy tweak, I think. But yeah, I thought he did a great job, and it's a shame that they had that defensive meltdown because like yesterday and today should really be like a celebration of like Colin Schlee and Malachi Thomas and Jeremiah Coney, but it's not. But yeah, I thought those guys handled themselves really well.
Yeah, Schlee was slinging it.
Yeah,
I mean early on he hits Gosnell. They clearly have a connection there. The one that he threw up the right sideline, the second one that went for 44 yards was just
awesome,
perfect.
It was the best deep ball catch thrown this year.
It was a dart. It was right on the line. He hit him in stride, and it was a big play there. First one maybe a little underthrown, but he didn't overthrow him. I mean, he underthrew it. That gives him a chance to get under it and make the play, and it was a big catch, and then they scored later on that. You mentioned him running to the outside. I think they had a nice game plan for that because as he's running to the outside, they did a lot of reverses coming back the other way. Jalen Lane scored on one. Aiden Green had a nice gain that they called a block in the back on that. I don't know if that was a block in the back. I think it was Braylon Moore.
And
I don't know that he touched him.
It was not a block. From the angle they showed on the replay, I didn't think it was a block.
It was like back. Like they had felt on a hold right before that, and they didn't have a good angle on replays there.
I saw Jersey move. Okay, so I do think.
I thought the Aiden Green one. I don't think that he got him there. That was sort of a big moment there because they could have been driving down for another score. But I think Schlee played great. I think there's only one play of his that I think he wishes he had back, and that's the one in overtime where they snapped it to Thomas, they hand it to him, they fake the reverse, and he's rolling around. There's two receivers, and if he just kind of cuts back inside a little bit, I think he's in the end zone. There was no Syracuse player there. Instead, he kind of fired it in between receivers almost, and I wonder how healthy he was at that point. I know he left earlier in the game, and I wonder if that was affecting him there. But other than that one play that missed opportunity, you'd say I thought he played great. They certainly got their money's worth out of him for what they paid for a backup to come in here.
As far as his health and overtime, after the next play, after the incompletion, he came up really gimpy, and I was watching the game with my buddy who's a former Tech player, and we were both like, "Oh man, he's limping pretty bad." And then, of course, on the very next play, Virginia Tech runs a power read or a power pull running play with him to the left side, which I thought was very interesting. You run that, like, this is probably my only complaint about Bowen on the day is like you ran the ball in 2nd and 20 with a quarterback who was clearly limping the play before. But
it's an overtime tradition because they ran drones when he was getting hit in the Vanderbilt game.
It's very eerily similar in overtime to the Vanderbilt game.
Right. But I don't want to knock on Bowen because I thought Bowen was great.
Oh, that was perhaps Bowen's best performance of the year,
and it never
considering who his lineup
and maybe
was.
his career. I thought, but it never should have come down to overtime. It never should have come down to it.
No, and David, I think you also have something too.
Yeah, well, one of the things in terms of Bowen that I want to talk about is I thought the way they came out in different formations. I mean, they had split backs in the backfield, but there were times where it was a receiver, like it was Lane or Green, right? Like just confusing. Obviously, Syracuse probably expected to face Kyron Drones. To see a new quarterback, I'm sure, is one thing. But then to see stuff that you probably haven't seen all season throws a whole nother wrinkle in there. And I thought Virginia Tech just did, we've seen the reverse a bunch of times this year, but there was an option element to that, the Jalen Lane touchdown. Like, they pulled out a bunch of bag of tricks. We saw the pitch.
I was about to say that, David. That they brought back the pitch play and then the fake pitch where the quarterback keeps it. Right.
Yeah. And I thought
they had a couple times too where they would just shift the players over, and then Malachi Thomas would take the snap and then do the fake handoff or hand it off to Schlee a couple times. I think they scored a touchdown.
You might be
didn't
right.
Malachi's? No,
that was with Pop in the game.
They picked up a first down. They picked up at least one first down where Malachi Thomas shifted over and took a direct snap. There was just so much trickery elements. I'm sure, Schlee maybe would like back the overthrow to Daquan Felton on that deep ball, and you can probably count on multiple hands the number of times Tech's just been a little too far on a deep ball. But all in all, considering the personnel in the backfield and at quarterback, like for Virginia Tech, they put up basically, Coney, Schlee, Coney, and Thomas. What they ran for is basically what Drones and Tootin run for in a game, and what Schlee threw for is basically what Drones throws for in a game. Like, they did that and then some. And I thought the way they did it, the trickery, the not being hard to read, I thought that was very impressive, considering that this is not like, it's not like they're going out there with their starting quarterback and starting running back and doing that.
Malachi Thomas and Jeremiah Coney combined to run for 169 yards and a touchdown. Coney, 9 carries, 96 yards. He should have had a touchdown if he didn't slip. And then Malachi Thomas, 14 carries for 73 yards. Something that I don't think people are talking about is Jeremiah Coney 3 weeks ago was their 4th running back. There was no depth in that room. None.
Right.
And to David's point, they continued to make things work. This would have been the most rewarding one under Brent Pry.
We thought there was no depth. Remember when we talked to Elijah Brooks, where, like, where's Coney doing? It's like, he's coming along fine, but am I going to take Bashal Tootin out of the game when he's running like this? Like, that was sort of the answer. It's like, you wouldn't take him out if he's running for 266 in a game like this. Right. So there just weren't a lot of carries for other guys to have, but you see that there's some ability in that room. And I went from thinking, oh man, they're in trouble next year once Tootin is gone, to, okay, there's some talent in that room still. And, that's just from not having seen them do anything in games. They didn't really have the opportunity.
Yeah, they haven't really, they ran Malachi Thomas a lot more last year than they have this year so far. So for me, it was like they seem to be losing trust in him, and they didn't have any trust in the backups. And I've been thinking, man, not only are they going to have to sign one portal running back in the offseason, probably going to have to sign 2 because they don't seem to trust any of their backups. Then you watch a game like that, and you're like, okay, yeah, those guys are capable players in the right scheme and the right game plan.
And also, kudos to Pop Watson for coming in like a rough situation. You're not thinking you're playing maybe this year at all, unless it's like extreme garbage time and you're just getting out there, like I think he did against ODU in that game. But it's like, okay, well, Drones can't go. Schlee's going to get the start. He'll be fine. It's like, oh, no, Schlee's down. You're going to have to come in. And he pretty calmly handed that play off. I don't know if it was a read play or just a straight handoff, but sure. The seas parted in the middle and Malachi Thomas scored the touchdown. And when you get down to your 3rd quarterback, you worry about the operation, if it's going to be smooth. And he stepped in there and he handled it great on his one play, and they scored a touchdown. Can't ask for much better than that.
They did. More stats in this one. Stephen Gosnell, 5 catches, 180 218 yards. For Syracuse, Kyle McCord went 24 for 35. I believe that is the lowest amount of passes he's thrown all year. 280 yards and 2 scores. LaQuint Allen ran for 121 yards and 3 touchdowns. Trevor Pena, 7 receptions, 83 yards. Justice Ross Simmons, 4 receptions, 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. And as a whole, penalty-wise, certainly hurt Virginia Tech. 9 penalties, 79 yards. Mentioned the block in the back, the holding in overtime. That was also, to me, a story in this one for the Hokies.
Yeah, definitely. Whenever you lose a 21-3 lead, penalties are gonna probably play some sort of a role in it. It was that NC State game when they blew the 18-point lead.
Correct. I was just gonna say
false starts.
That was Tech's most penalized game in a long time. So this was tied for Tech's most penalties this season. Tech had 9. Tech had 9 against Boston College. This was the second most yardage.
Yeah, and I thought the one call, the block in the back, was a bad call, but at the same time, officials don't have the benefit of replay, right. Like we do. Those calls, especially at certain angles, are very difficult to make in real time. And the fact of the matter is, yeah, it hurt the Hokies, but that doesn't excuse giving up 4 touchdowns over the course of 5 possessions in regulation to close the game, which ultimately that's why they lost, not because of any official decision.
No doubt. David, you had some stats on your own, but I know you also have stat time with Scott Glessner pulled up too. I think Scott had some interesting things he sent to Will this morning.
Yeah, there were a few. I'll go through a couple of Scott's, and then I've got a couple other nuggets. Scott said coming into the season, Virginia Tech had scored points in every overtime except for one, which was the 2012 Sugar Bowl against Michigan. Tech was outscored 3-0.
Which they actually did score in that overtime.
Yeah.
Tech has been shut out in both overtimes this season and outscored 7-0, Vanderbilt and Syracuse. The last time Virginia Tech had a lead of 14 plus after the first quarter and lost was the battle at Bristol in 2016 against Tennessee. I mentioned the last time the Hokies were up prior to, of course, the 2022 game. The last time the Hokies were up 18 and blew a lead like that was the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Scott said that's the last time Tech had a double-digit halftime lead and lost.
Wow.
The Chick-fil-A Bowl in 2006. Virginia Tech has forced 2+ turnovers in 5 straight games, which hasn't happened for the first time since 2013 in one season. It happened at the end of the 2014 and the beginning of the 2015 season. But 2013, games 2 through 6, last time Tech had 2+ turnovers in 5 straight games. Scott's the last stat Scott sent. That is the 8th straight season Virginia Tech has lost its first game in November. The last time the Hokies won their opener in November was 2016 against Duke, which was a 24-21 win.
That's a crazy stat.
That's a great way to fall out of ACC contention every single year.
Every single November, exactly. So I guess
since the last time they were in the ACC championship game in 2016.
Good point.
Wow. I looked up Mansour Delane's numbers. It's the first time since 2017, November 4th, against Miami, that Tech had a player with a forced fumble and a pick. That was Adonis Alexander. It's the 17th time since 1985. Ironically, every single game except those last 2 were wins. Under Pry, Virginia Tech entered the day 3-0 when rushing for 200 and passing for 200. Tech had won its last 6 in a row when doing that. Since the November 2020 game against Liberty. That was Tech's last loss when rushing for 200 and passing for 200 or more. And I thought it was interesting. I tweeted this. I looked this up when we were out at dinner after the game on Saturday night. Frank Beamer, from the first game of the 2000 season against Akron to his very last game against Tulsa, won 23 straight games when Virginia Tech ran for 200 plus and passed for 200 plus.
Whoa, that's a great stat.
Won 23 straight games when doing that, which kind of shows you that. And one of the things I'm about to go do is look up close games year by year, one score games year by year, since '87 for Virginia Tech. But safe to say Beamer's teams were obviously very, very good at, and even some of Fuente's teams were pretty good at, you know, when they put up good numbers, they kind of won that game handily.
The 2016 Duke game, was that the one where they blocked the field goal and Adonis Alexander ran it back for a touchdown?
That might have been.
Yeah,
That might
I
have
think
been.
Stroman blocked it.
That was a
Stroman
game.
blocked it?
That was
I
a
think
game
so.
that was closer than it probably should have been. But like the Hokies were at that point in the season. I don't want to say they were running on fumes, but it seemed like they were kind of pacing themselves a little bit.
So let's go to halftime. It is 14-3. This is one of the big topics of discussion post game.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to clock management. I know, clock management. There's a minute and 3 seconds, I want to say, left in the first half. Virginia Tech gets the ball at its own 26-yard line. And they're playing to go to the half, which is totally fine. Like, on 25-yard line, a minute left, you're up 14-3. Jeremiah Coney then breaks off a big run, and they get to about midfield. Then Pry's going to essentially go for it and try and at least get 3 points. So he calls timeout. There is 17 seconds left, and I believe Tech is somewhere around the 50. There's a bad snap.
40. It was like the 49-yard line because he lost like 3 yards on that.
18 seconds left.
18 seconds, I'm sorry. A bad snap. Colin Schlee goes down and picks it up, but his knee is down. That is not called that way on the field. He then picks up around 20 yards, and Tech was in prime position to kick the field goal. They then go back and look at it upon review, and clearly his knee is down. So at that point, and that would have been 17 seconds left at that point.
They had 12 seconds when he was down, and they thought it was going to be like the 36 or wherever he got to.
He got up to the 31-yard
As it
line.
was after replay, they said, no, you were down initially, so there were going to be 17 seconds left off. But then they also say, because that would have been a moving clock at that point, there has to be a 10-second runoff, which gets us to the controversy.
Yes. So to me, it was very unclear to me upstairs. And me and Razi Marani were talking about it. Damian Sordelet from the Roanoke Times came over and we were discussing it at halftime. But the thing to me was I had just assumed that Tech had taken the timeout and conserved the time, which is why I was so surprised that there were 7 seconds on the clock. But listening to the post game with Mike Burnup and reading your story, Chris, Brent Pry made it very clear to Mike, where he didn't to the media, that they chose not to call timeout and instead went with the 10-second runoff, which could have, again, costed Virginia Tech 3 points.
I'm even more confused after listening to all the post-game stuff than I was when I was actually watching it. Because he told the media, well, you guys afterwards, he gave one answer, which wasn't very clear. And though I didn't hear it myself, a bunch of other people who listened to it have told me that his post-game answer to the radio crew was different. And he said that Virginia Tech chose the 10-second runoff because they didn't really trust their protection on long field goals, because they got one blocked last week against Georgia Tech on a long attempt.
Yep.
But I mean, they made 2 earlier in the season against Miami. And I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, even if you don't trust your field goal protection, like, fine, take a timeout anyway and try to complete a pass and then maybe throw a Hail Mary or something like that. But I don't know. The 2 answers don't make much sense. Especially,
But why would he hide it? That's the thing to me. Why is he hiding it?
Is he hiding it, or is he just still confused about the situation?
Right.
I mean, based on how some of these end-of-half situations, end-of-game situations have been before, this staff has not distinguished itself
That's fair.
in operating in those situations. So it might be that they just didn't know what was going on, and they screwed up the situation. I mean, the bottom line is it should have been 17 seconds, the ball at their own 46. Tech should have used its second timeout there, had 1 left, and they should have been able to run a play. Instead, for some reason, they let the clock run off 10 seconds without calling the timeout. It whines when they set it down. They barely even got the snap off. Yeah. And then they just hand it to Coney, who, twists the knife a little bit, runs for 47 yards down to like the 5-yard line or something like that. It's like, well, that looks great on the stat sheet. It gets you no points there. I thought before, leading up to that, they handled that fine. Like, if you want to go into the halftime 14-3, that's fine. But you broke a run. You busted a run, got up to the 49-yard line, I think it was.
And Pry ran up to the official and called timeout.
Yeah, at that point, it's go time. Then you're going for it. Even if say the officials had screwed up and they said you only have 1 timeout, even though you just called one before, and you want to use that to stop the clock, use it to stop the clock with 17 seconds, and you try to do something in that situation because you're close enough to get it done. Like this idea that, we've had trouble with protection on long field goals, like, you're scared of a field goal block. Not only the field goal block, but them picking it up and going the other way for a touchdown. Like Georgia Tech blocked a kick last week. They didn't return it for a touchdown. Right. I mean, I go back to my column that, scared money don't make money type stuff. Like that is being overly cautious to the level that's just ridiculous. And I feel like it's another situation they just did not handle it properly. And I'm sure we'll talk about the end of game situation too. A little more forgivable, I think, than this one. I think this one they had an opportunity to really, press the accelerator, go for it, extend this lead right before halftime. You've got a great kicker. It's not like this offense has been bad. The backup quarterback looked pretty good up to that point. They had a chance to go and try to get some more points and make it even tougher for Syracuse to come back, and they chose not to. I mean, at the very least, just throw a Hail Mary. If you let the clock run down, just throw it down to the end zone. Like, unless you're afraid they're going to intercept it and return it 100 yards. Like, that could happen, but, I mean, there's a risk-reward you have to weigh in this stuff, and it does not feel like this staff just has that muscle in their repertoire there. Like they just don't seem to do it. And you can see why they're 1-11 in one-score games. This is part of the reason why they're 0-4 in one-score games this year. They've lost 7 straight. And that, as I wrote my 5 thoughts, that's kind of a 50-50 deal, one-score game. The ball's going to bounce certain ways in certain games, and sometimes you just lose based on luck. But to lose 7 straight like that and be 1-11, like if you flipped the coin 12 times, it came up 11, you'd be like, what's wrong with this coin? There's something wrong with this coin. This is not on the level. And you have to start asking this question, like, is there something not on the level at the top here that they're making these decisions that are negatively impacting the team?
Yeah, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Listening to the post game yesterday and reading your story, I almost didn't believe it. Like, I was like, wait, they didn't call the timeout? Because, again, they made the 57-yarder at Miami.
Well, yeah.
And they made a 57-yarder at Miami.
I know Georgia Tech blocked one, but Georgia Tech's got one of the best field goal blocking teams in the country.
Zeke Biggers wasn't on the field for Syracuse on that. He's the guy that blocked that. The other thing is, they just sort of matter-of-factly accepted it. Like, the officials screwed up there or didn't explain the situation correct. You've got to flip out at that point. Like, you've got the Hail Mary, karma on your side at that point. Like, you've built up a little equity by the fact that you, didn't lose your mind on that one, and you gave them a little grace on the field there with not getting an explanation or how that whole thing played out. I would lose my mind on this one. Like, you've got to flip out and go, he kept saying, they wanted to move along quickly. It's like, make them not move along quickly. All right. Throw a tantrum on the sideline. Like, if you get a 15-yard penalty, who cares? You weren't going for it anyway.
Right.
It wasn't going to lead to anything. It's not like it really would have damaged you anyway. So I think he's got to make a bigger stink about this at the time and go, no, this has to be corrected in the moment right now. I don't care if you want to move along to the next play. I'm going to stand on the field here and pout about it for a little while. I mean, you've got to be like that sometimes, the head coach. And I think, I don't want to say he's too polite, but he just seems too kind sometimes in those kind of situations.
Yeah, no, and also too with that whole situation is he keeps on saying, and he mentioned it with the late game situation too, which we'll get to. He keeps on saying a backup quarterback on the road. That's true. Colin Schlee again was playing a very nice game for Virginia Tech at that point. It was not the 2021 Boston College game.
Yeah, exactly right, Carter. Colin Schlee could be starting for a number of teams. I look at, you telling me he wouldn't be starting for Auburn? See how bad their quarterback play is? Kentucky quarterback play, which ironically was his other finalist. I mean, I just think he could be starting in a number of different places if used properly. So, yeah, I was fine. I would have been fine with throwing the ball in that situation with Colin Schlee because he's a fifth-year senior. He's had a 2,000-yard passing season. He's got plenty of starting experience. He's been there. He's done that. He's played a good game up to that point. So, yeah. But
Stephen Gosnell had 100 receiving yards in the first half.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just throw it up to him. Things were happening with him all game long.
That deep ball that he threw down the sideline, I've got a buddy who was working during the game. He could only watch bits and pieces of the game with no volume. And he told me, he said, I didn't realize Drones wasn't playing until I stuck my head out and saw that deep ball down the sideline, and I realized that wasn't Drones. Because, Schlee he threw a better deep ball than Drones does on that play. So, he was on, I'm going to say he was on a roll, but you had every opportunity to go down the field and score with him at quarterback.
It just seems like they're always on the wrong side of what they should do in some of these situations. Remember the halftime at Stanford? when they got the ball back at like their 20.
Yeah.
And there was like 15 seconds left or so. Like it was a really low amount of time, I'm pretty sure. And then Drones threw that near pick that would have just been disastrous before halftime. And maybe that's in the back of their mind, but you're your own 46 at that point. You need to get 15 yards to reasonably give John Love a field goal attempt in the dome. Pretty good kicking atmosphere to be able to kick like that, going towards the band that he later interrupted in the halftime show while they were doing their Thriller halftime. He got booed the entire second half because he just kept doing his routine while they were doing their halftime show around him. But that's awesome. You mentioned the 57-yarder. Like, yeah, he's made a field goal like that before. You can't be scared to go out there and let them have that attempt at the minimal chance that they both block it and return it the other way for a touchdown.
I think you had something to
Yeah, the alarming thing to me is that like this is now. I feel like Chris has said this a certain way before. Like after a certain point, it just kind of becomes who you are. Like it's not just a number. It's like it's more than a trend. It's kind of just that's your personality, kind of characteristic now. Brent Pry's first game as the head coach at Virginia Tech was against Old Dominion, and they had clock management gaffe in that game too. That was where the pass interference penalty, I believe Dorian Strong and Ollie Jennings, was declined, and like almost 20-30 seconds ran off the clock. Right? That's your first game as a head coach. There's so much going on. Right? That's over 3 years ago, or about beginning of year one. Like it's so long ago. I feel like it's kind of understandable for your first game jitters kind of thing, right? But it just feels like as we've gone on, it hasn't gone away. And that is kind of the worrying thing, I think. Like maybe it wasn't as big of a deal in some games last season, but think about the beginning of, you could nitpick some of the decisions in the Vanderbilt game at the beginning of the year. Clearly the Miami game, I mean, just what everything that happened at the end of the first half, everything that happened at the end of the second half. I mean, just the way they managed the clock throughout that. I mean, they ran off like nearly a minute on like 3 or 4 plays right before the end of the game in the Hail Mary attempt. Like then this. Like maybe it's not just on them. Maybe you can blame some of the officials in this moment too. But again, at some point it becomes a real problem, and that's more on you than it's just kind of a 1 or 2 time thing, right? And I think that is the alarming part, because Tech was in a position, even if this was a close game the whole way, right? Even if Tech didn't blow an 18-point lead, like Tech played well enough to win this game. And regardless of the defense, allowing 5 touchdowns on Syracuse last 6 possessions, it's like those little situations, those little tiny things that maybe at a certain point and during the game don't seem like a very, very big deal, they come back to bite you if you don't play it the right way. And it just seems like time and time again, Tech has played it kind of the wrong way. Well,
a positive note, how nice was it to see Ollie Jennings get involved once again in the second half with a touchdown?
Yeah, I guess it was a slant pattern. So and he had tweeted the night before, free 0, and everybody saw that thread and everything. So it was good to see him get in the end zone on a particular play that appeared to be designed specifically for him. So hopefully that gets him going a little bit.
Wasn't an easy catch either. I mean, like diving catch with the guy draped on his back in the end zone. So yeah, good to see that. And I mean, if they can get him going, that's just another weapon in this offense.
All right, let's go to the end of game clock management controversy. To Andy's point, I don't think it's as egregious as the end of the first half, because I think it's a more debatable subject is probably a fair way to put it. But let's start with, it's 31-24. Syracuse gets the ball back with 5:16. They go right down the field very methodically. There's about a minute left. I'll pull up the exact time in just a minute. There was about a minute left when they have the ball at the 1-yard line. If you're Brent Pry in that scenario, are you thinking about calling a timeout in that situation?
At this point in the game, I'm not interested on the defense being on the field anymore. Whether it's Syracuse getting the ball back or whether it's in overtime. Like, they can't stop Syracuse at this point. So you need to try to win the game. Make sure it doesn't go to overtime. So yeah, as soon as Syracuse got it within the 15-yard line, I would have been using my timeouts to get as much time on the clock as possible for my offense. You run the risk of, if you do stop them and then you go through and at 3 and out, then Syracuse might get the ball back. But at that point, there's going to be so little time left, I doubt they would have been able to do anything with it. So for me, it's all about, I thought as soon as Syracuse got the ball within the 15, they were going to score because Tech just wasn't stopping them. So I'm thinking ahead, okay, how do you win the football game without your defense being on the field again? Because they couldn't stop Syracuse at that point. So to me, it's all about leaving your offense with as much time as possible to go down the field and try to kick a field goal. So yeah, I think they should have been calling timeouts. I think they should have had over a minute left when they got the ball back with 1 or 2 timeouts remaining, and that gives yourself a puncher's chance to get into John Love field goal range. That's how I view it.
The other part of it is like, if Syracuse scores, what if they go for 2? A lot of teams do go for 2 in that situation. Now, granted, they had momentum going in the second half, and they're playing at home and probably the better offense since you have a starting quarterback versus the backup quarterback. But it's not a guarantee that they just kick the extra point.
They had gone for 2 earlier in the game.
They had an extra point blocked earlier in the game, so it's not like that was an automatic, and almost got blocked, I think, at the end of that one.
Yep.
So, I mean, what if they go for 2 there and they get it and they take the lead, and then you got 30 seconds left? You're like, well, we should preserve some more time. So I think... Yeah, I mean, it's always tough in that situation. Do you let the clock just kind of keep going, and then the pressure is on the other team with a ticking clock to go execute in that situation? But like you said, once you got to the 1-yard line, it sort of felt inevitable that they were going to score, and you got to leave something coming back the other way, and they didn't do that. And then, coming back the other way, you got 29 seconds at your 25, and it's just sort of a give-up run. And that, again, I kind of understand that's a long ways to go. But, this isn't like you're preserving a lead, just want to be happy, get into halftime. You can go down and win the game in regulation and take overtime out of it. Again, you've got a pretty good kicker. Again, it's not like your offense has struggled all day. Your offense had moved the ball. This quarterback had proven to be capable of throwing it. And he's like, I didn't want to put the ball in jeopardy in that situation. Well, it's like, if you don't put it in jeopardy, you also don't give yourself any chance to win.
Well, why didn't you take a knee?
Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
If you're really, very true. If you're not serious about scoring because you don't want to turn the ball over, why even risk a handoff there?
Yeah, and he said Syracuse had 3 timeouts. They had 2 timeouts left there. He's like, I didn't want to give them the ball back. It's like, well, if you run 3 plays there, even if they're all 3 incompletions, it takes 15 seconds off the clock probably. So you're down to 14. You punt the ball. I mean, that's going to take 7 seconds, 8 seconds. I mean, they'd have 1 play. They'd be able to throw a Hail Mary coming the other way. And I know maybe they're a little skittish about Hail Marys these days after the Miami one, but you've got to try, I feel like, in that situation. Even if you only get to the 50-yard line, you have to throw a Hail Mary yourself. I mean, heck, you almost had one earlier this year. Something happens. You could get an interference call, could get an odd tip. Look what happened with the Commanders against the Bears a couple weeks ago. I mean, these low percentage plays do hit, but you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to be able to have a shot to do that. You have to try to do that to be able to have a shot for the payoff at it. And they didn't do it there. And it's just, I think it's sort of that lack of a killer instinct, or lack of just like it's the scared money don't make money quote again. It's Ryan Willis lording over the program for all these years with that one great quote that he gave Aaron McFarlane of all people, like the one huge gambler on the beat, and he was the guy who he gave the answer to. I mean, sometimes, and I wrote this in my column. It's like, he was. It sounds like they were a little skittish and a little like, we had our backup quarterback, backup running back, and that should have been liberating. Because then you've got nothing to lose at that point. And if you go for it and you don't get it, and say you turn it over and Syracuse wins the game, you go, well, we took a shot with it with our backup quarterback. Like, what do we were in a tie game, 31-31 with our backup quarterback, backup running backs at that point. Nobody's going to fault you for that. They're going to fault you for tiptoeing into a loss like this rather than trying to go for it in that situation.
I thought Syracuse played that nearly perfect. I mean, you talk about like think of it from the Syracuse perspective a little bit. Like, they get the ball with 5:16 left, and they had a 14-play drive that left Virginia Tech 32 seconds. Mm-hmm. Like, that's as great of a drive. And honestly, I mean, Syracuse took a timeout with 32 seconds to go. The play, right before the 1-yard touchdown. There was a minute and 26. There was a pass interference penalty that gave Syracuse half the distance to the goal from the 28-yard line to the 14-yard line with a minute and 26 seconds left. Syracuse ran 3 more plays, got down to the 1. They ran 2 plays. That was the pass down to the 1 yard line, and then had McCord tried to push it real quick and it didn't get it. And then Syracuse called timeout with 32 seconds left. But like, I feel like that's where you take the timeouts, right? You don't, like, if they're down at the 1 yard line, you probably want to preserve some time there. So Syracuse, I think, played it very, very well. Fran Brown, first-year head coach. I thought Syracuse kind of played that well. They basically took off 4 minutes in about 10 plays, and then those final 4 plays took about 30 seconds. But I'm sure Brent Pry would like to have that back.
Well, Andy, to your point in your post-game story and your 5 thoughts yesterday, man, you just would have loved to have seen them try with 29 seconds. And I think the frustrating thing is you're taking 4 timeouts with you to next weekend.
Can you imagine?
You
Mike,
don't get points for those for saving them.
Can you imagine Mike Young losing a 1-score basketball game and still having a timeout? You know, I mean, that's something he'd get asked about in the post game, and he'd say, "Yeah, should have used it." Right? I just don't like sitting on timeouts. Can we talk about the decision to play defense first?
I was
going to
bring that up next. Yes.
I think that's a Virginia Tech, according to the announcers, won the toss in overtime and, elected to defend. That's a by the book decision. And I'm generally on board with by the book decisions, but I also think there has to be a certain feel aspect of it. The Virginia Tech defense couldn't stop anybody at that point in the game, and they had just been on the field for, what was it, a 14-play drive that took up 5 minutes off the clock, and then you choose to immediately put them back on the field.
Well, I mean, Virginia Tech had that short little drive at the end, and then there was a break before they started. I think you have to play it as the strategy side of it. Right. And go, okay, we're going to know what we need to do offensively. That is a huge advantage in overtime. And I think that's why you always play defense in that situation. They didn't look particularly effective at stopping that little trick play that they started with on the first one. That they lined up the 4 linemen outside and had the sweep across. There's nobody in the middle, and he's got 16 yards right off the bat. It was a bad start, and I didn't think they were stopping him after that at that point. But I think the value of knowing what you need on the other side. We were kind of talking about this, what if Virginia Tech started with the ball and then Schlee fumbled like he did? Right. Then all of a sudden Syracuse just needs a field goal in that situation. It's so advantageous to play defense first there that I think you have to do it.
It's kind of a moot point because it never should have gone to overtime.
Right, yes. Yeah. But it is a tricky subject because, to your point, it's one of those things where the default is you're always going to play defense first. Like, I don't know if I've seen somebody choose to take the ball in overtime.
And I guess I'm
Say it again, Nick?
Dion.
Okay.
He did it. I think by the end of that game, I was so done with the Virginia Tech defense that I would have just as soon gotten the ball first, score a touchdown, and then go for 2. Because I'm just going to assume they're going to score a touchdown.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then have them go first. Because if they go and score a touchdown, they're going to kick the extra point. And then you're like, okay, well, if we score the touchdown, and they might have done this if it got to that point. If they had scored a touchdown, go for 2 and then try to get the win there.
I would have gone for 2. I don't think that was a popular opinion talking to some buddies. I would have gone for 2 in overtime. Right. The defense was just so gassed. But I also understand the point where it's like, you're going to alternate 2-point plays in double overtime, and it did not work out for Duke against SMU. Right. But
this is also why you try to do something with that little time you have left in regulation. Yes. So it doesn't even get to that point. You've got an extra possession in there and an extra shot to go try to get points. Now, it's a low odds that you're going to get that, but you have that before you even get to the overtime where it becomes just a coin flip at that point.
This is why it's becoming more and more important that Virginia Tech needs to blow teams out. They're up 21-3.
Oh, I thought you were going to say they're going to need to hire a Jerry Kill type on the sideline. I mean, that's going to be they're going to have to at this point. Remember when Mike London had all of his timeout issues and stuff, and they brought in Tom O'Brien? Right. And they're like, you're going to stand near him and just tell him how to manage the game. I feel like Tech needs that because whatever system they have in place or people they have advising him right now, it's not working.
Right. Well, here's the whole thing about a head coach, about hiring someone to help the head coach manage the game. That's the entire purpose of the head coach on game day himself, right? If somebody else is managing the game for him, then he might as well just hand that guy the headset, go up in the booth, talk to big donors, and raise more NIL money. That's the whole job of the head coach, is to make the right in-game decisions.
No?
It is, but I mean, it's not like it's the only role of the coach. You set the agenda for the program, you set the tenor at practice, you
that's
recruit,
but I mean,
you do all
on
the
game
off-field
day,
stuff.
that's his
Right,
job.
like but it's the tactical game day stuff. It feels like they're kind of lacking with it right now. And they've got to, like everybody's like, oh, you got to fire Pry, you got to start over. It's like, no, I don't think that's the case. But I think you have to give him the help he needs, or make it clear to him that he needs the help in certain situations, because it's not working right now.
I hate to say it, just to wrap up the football conversation, but it is such a gut punch that now the Clemson game, regardless of what they did, doesn't mean what it could have meant this weekend. And Clemson coming to town, obviously it's going to be a huge game regardless. And now you're kind of, your goals preseason aren't ahead of you anymore.
No, they're not.
With 3 games left.
And Clemson looks very human-like when they play a team with a pulse.
It's true.
And Virginia Tech, as frustrated as we are, certainly has a pulse. So Virginia Tech is not Appalachian State. They're not Wake Forest. They're not going to be. I don't think they're going to be overmatched by Clemson. Like Clemson, when they got on that roll and they were scoring a bunch of points and blowing teams out, like all those teams were pretty bad. NC State has improved since then, but at the time we're a really bad football team. So I think Virginia Tech has the ability to put up much more of a fight, but like, what's it going to mean if Virginia Tech does win the game? I think it makes up for one of those earlier losses that they probably shouldn't have lost, but a lot of the juice has been lost from this game, as you would say.
Yeah, I mean, when you go into the season and your head coach is saying at the ACC kickoff he'd be disappointed if you don't make the ACC championship, well, they're not going to the ACC championship. That's gone at this point. And I think a lot of people think at 8-4, 9-3, like, oh, with this schedule, that's what they should do minimum. I mean, 8-4 is the max at this point. They go 7-5 again, sort of what they were last year, 6-6. Needing to beat Virginia at the end of the year to get to 6-6. We've seen that movie before. They've done that 5 times in the last 12 years. 6 times if you count that 2018 game where they had to win that to get to another game to even get to bowl eligibility. So it just felt like this was an opportunity for this program to take a step forward this year, and now it's going to be sort of stuck in that, probably in that 7-5, 6-6 range again, and that's going to feel disappointing.
And Clemson is going to come in this game and give it everything they've got because they have to win to stay in the ACC title picture.
Yep,
this is a must-win game for Clemson. Their backs are against the wall. They're going to be very dangerous.
It is essentially a playoff game now for Clemson. They need to win every single game left to accomplish their goals. David, before we wrap it up, basketball starts tonight. The women have UNCW at 5. The men Delaware State at 8. Give us something to look for tonight for both squads.
There's a lot to look for. I mean, for the men, I'm curious to watch the point guards, see how they play. Brandon Recksteiner, he's the starter now. Ben Hammond's going to play a lot, from what I gather. He's going to have to play this year for the Hokies. How does Mike Young rotate in, maybe play a guy like Rodney Brown Jr., from what I understand? Play him at point guard, have him handle the ball when those two guys, Recksteiner and Hammond, are not on the floor. That's going to be interesting. A lot of newcomers, a lot of new faces. Interested to see if Jaden Shute can kind of light it up early. He's going to have to be a big-time scorer for the Hokies this year. On the women's side, the tempo. This is the first time we're really going to see the tempo against a D1 team. Obviously, we saw it against Limestone, but that's a little bit different. What do the Hokies look like defensively, too? That's what I'm curious to see. Rebounding was a little bit of a problem. Can they kind of shore that up, be a little bit better in that area? So there's a lot to look forward to.
Well, crossover season, what is coming up on techsideline.com the rest of the week, Mr. Coleman?
I'm sticking to football myself until we get a better idea about the basketball team.
Yeah.
See how they look their first couple games, see how they look against Penn State, and I think we'll have a better idea of maybe where the season's going to go. But it's going to be a normal week of content for me and for the football side of things.
TBD for me based on who they're going to give us for interviews. We haven't found that out yet, but I will be doing a mailbag later this week, so look for that on the site.
Basketball.
Yeah?
Yeah, peak basketball. It's a busy week. Doubleheader today. Men play Friday and Monday. Women play Sunday in Charlotte, along with Clemson game for football squeezed in between. It's going to be a busy couple weeks here.
Podcasting-wise, the Clemson preview will be on Thursday.
I thought we said Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah,
Wednesday. Early this week.
Wednesday. Clemson preview on Wednesday. Giovanni Heater will be back. I know he hated to miss the Syracuse recap, but We had a good time. We had a good time. So for Chris Coleman, Andy Bitter, David Cunningham, Nick Brown, I'm Carter Hill. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you very soon.